Let's dig into Pennsylvania, because this is obviously one of the marquee races. Fetterman early on had a huge lead according to the polls. That has tightened significantly. Here is the latest from Rasmussen, which has Fetterman at 45 and Oz at 43. So Fetterman with a narrow +2 lead. They also have the race for governor very close. Shapiro 43, Mastriano at 40. Very different picture than the picture we showed you before with CNN. We do have, just as a reminder, go ahead and put the CNN polling there up on the screen. The next piece, which has Fetterman +5 and Shapiro over Mastriano +15. One thing that I did note here is Fetterman continues to be above water in terms of his approval rating, which for a modern politician is really quite an accomplishment. Oz significantly, almost 20 points underwater on his approval rating. And you see an even wider disparity among Shapiro and Mastriano. Shapiro has a huge positive favorability rating. I'm not going to embarrass myself by trying to do that math live because I'm just not that smart. Mastriano is significantly underwater on his approval rating. So I think there's a battle playing out, as I was alluding to before, of like, do I care more about how I feel about this candidate, or do I care more about who I want to control the Senate in Washington? You know, even a lot of swing voters have this sort of instinct of like, oh, I want divided government to serve as a check on one party or the other, which I think is part of why you see this historical phenomenon of the party in power doing poorly in the midterms or ultimately. So kind of no matter what poll you look at, this race has definitely tightened. I think that two things have been effective for Oz. First of all, I honestly think that the biggest thing that they've done effectively is the crime messaging. And that seems to be—
and it works.
That seems to be working in a lot of states across the board right now. And then, you know, Fetterman did a really good job early on defining the Oz campaign. Now they've been kind of on their back foot trying to defend his just ability to be able to do the job. You see that going into the debate tonight. We have Dave Weigel, who is now with that new outlet, Semaphore. He left the Post. That's a whole other story we could talk about there. But anyway, Weigel over at Semaphore now noted that Fetterman's team, we can put this up on the screen, is messaging in advance of the debate that they're kind of trying to, the Herschel Walker method of downplaying expectations. They're warning that we should anticipate viral videos of him, quote, missing some words, etc. They acknowledge he was never a great debater. That was an issue in the primary where Lamb Kenyatta knocked him for skipping some debates. Let me just read you a little bit more of the campaign statement. They're saying, we're prepared for Oz's allies and right-wing media to circulate malicious viral videos after the debate that try to paint John in a negative light because of awkward pauses, missing some words, mushing other words together. The captioning process might lead to time delays and errors in the exchanges between the moderation and the candidates. In fact, because the captions are going to be typed out by human beings in real time on live TV, some amount of human error in the transcription is inevitable, might cause temporary miscommunication at times. It's impossible to control and unavoidable. That's okay. What matters is that people get to see and hear John's values. So they're referring there to the fact that, you know, he has continued auditory processing issues. It's fine if he can read the text, but has trouble just like in real time hearing what people are saying and really processing that and comprehending it. So they're going to be using closed captions like we saw him use in a number of interviews, which, you know, is undoubtedly going to lead to a kind of like awkward experience, I think, for everybody involved.
It's jarring to watch, right? And look, more what I would say is, in general, I don't think any of these things matter. We've said that over and over again. Now, look, I actually think debates are important in terms of putting candidates on the record in the future. They're really useful whenever you're looking at them years later and said, well, you said this, but in general, we have reams of political science data to show us that debates have almost no impact on the general election, and it is almost entirely like a media-driven phenomenon. Now, does that mean that we won't pay attention? Sure, we'll pay attention. But again, only to look at noteworthy things, not necessarily to say that this is going to move the direction in one way or the other. Fetterman's
you really
health
have to
is
have
priced in at this point.
Some kind of crazy, off-the-wall moment for it to penetrate really at all. I mean, we haven't seen any— there have been a number of Senate debates at this point with a bunch of clips circulating around, but they haven't really moved the needle.
Ron DeSantis debated last night. Does anybody care? There was like one or two clips. I was like, oh, it doesn't look that great.
Yeah.
And I went, doesn't matter. It's not going to do anything. I just think that, again, I think it's sad, but people are driven much more by the national environment. And frankly, the positions that these people take, as long as they hold their ground within like a median 25th to 75th percentile or whatever,
Right.
Fine.
I mean, Fetterman, I think they're smart to downplay expectations here. And like I said, it worked out for Herschel Walker. Overall, as I watch these polls close and Republicans close the gap, it really does validate my view that candidate quality really just doesn't matter that much.
I agree with you.
You know?
I agree with you 100%.
Because even in the Fetterman-Oz race or in the Shapiro-Mastriano race in Pennsylvania, like you look at the approval ratings, there's these huge disparities. I think there was a time when that would dictate like, oh, this guy's going to run away with it. Now, because partisan affiliation, because politics are so national and because partisan affiliation is so strong, I just don't think it really matters that much anymore. So we have all these debates about like how should you run and what should you be, you know, and like should you align yourself more on the left or more in the center and what should your affect be and all these things and these scandals that come out with Herschel Walker and whatever. And ultimately, even something like that where you have a kind of extreme case of a really bad candidate who just like routinely lies and is hypocritical in his personal life and all of that, it might make a little bit of a difference. I think Walker would probably be clearly leading in that race if he hadn't had all of these scandals, but it is not the like clear determinative factor that it ultimately once was. The last thing to note here in Pennsylvania, which is an interesting conversation in and of itself, is that Biden and Obama are planning on going to Pennsylvania to try, as Axios frames it, to lock down that state for Fetterman and for Mastriano. They're going to barnstorm Philadelphia and Pittsburgh areas on November 5th with the party nominees for Pennsylvania governor and Senate. One thing that's interesting here is that, first of all, the choice of Pennsylvania obviously is interesting. They sort of see this as, I guess, the key state in terms of being able to hold on to the Senate. The other thing that's interesting here, though, is that Biden has really not campaigned for Democrats hardly at all. I mean, he's done a little bit, but at this point, Trump had fronted rallies in 26 cities leading into his midterm election, and Obama had held 14. I mean, Trump famously loves going out and being with the crowd, whatever. He eats it up. Right. But even, you know, Obama, who was equally as unpopular as Biden, back in that point, and in some ways was more of a central figure in terms of the election and the messaging and whatever. He had gone out and held 14 rallies, so read into that what you will. Personally, you know, I mean, Biden's not great on the stump. He wasn't good on the stump in his own campaign, sort of low energy, you know, kind of putting on display, creating opportunities for people to see some of the brain malfunctions and whatever. So I don't think that they've seen it as that much of an asset either for him or for the candidates for him to be on the trail. But nevertheless, the two are reuniting for this tour of Pennsylvania, apparently.
Yeah, I mean, that's interesting. I actually saw them speak in Pennsylvania. I think it was 2012. It was kind of interesting. It was a very different Biden back then.
Yeah, that's right.
Obama, look, he's a formidable force on the stump. That being said, the stump actually mattered. There really is not a lot of evidence to show that either. It really is crazy when you consider like all of the things that people pour money into. And at the end of the day, negative ads and then the national mood seem to matter more than anything. And negative ads are probably a lot less effective than the national mood. Like I would much rather just something happen to Joe Biden, or, you know, I'm saying this not in a good way, but like it'd be better if the economy crashed or something like that right before the election than any ad dollar you spend. I remember in my own hometown in College Station, we had a guy named Chet Edwards. He had survived every single challenge. He was a Democrat representing like an R+26 district. He always won on local issues, veterans affairs. He lived in office for 20 years.
Great constituent services, that kind of guy.
Incredible. Blue dog to the core, all of that. 2010, wiped out by 30 points, and he had survived 20-point leads. 30 points. He lost the biggest margin in the entire House of Representatives.
Wow.
And I remember asking him, I was like, is there anything you could have done? He's like, nothing.
No.
Nothing I could have done.
You know, there's having personally lost a congressional race by a large margin. There's some comfort in it because, you just know. You don't agonize over like, oh, it was just a few hundred votes. If I just done it. No, you just look at it, you're like, there is no way anyone could have pulled this thing off, no matter how much money or different decisions or whatever. And I do think increasingly that's the thing. You know, something that underscores my view also of how national politics is, how partisan politics is ultimately in Pennsylvania. And I think this was the case also in Wisconsin in that CNN poll. There is no overlap basically at all between the people who have a favorable view of Fetterman and the people that have a favorable view of Oz. You're one or the other. There is like, so I'll give you the numbers. 79% of Pennsylvania likely voters like one of them and dislike the other. 1% have a positive view of both, and 8% have a negative view of both. So there's only 1% of Pennsylvania voters that's like, either of these guys, they're kind of okay dudes.
Right.
Like almost everybody is either I like Oz or I like Fetterman, and there is no in between. And like I said, in Wisconsin, it was exactly the same dynamic. Not that surprising, I guess, but just kind of interesting to actually see the numbers on that.
Completely agree.
Cable news is ripping us apart, dividing the country, making it impossible to function as a society, and making it impossible to know just what is true and what is false. But the good news is they are failing and they know it.
That is why we're building something new, a new mainstream, a healthier one, something more trustworthy, something that we are going to need in one of the most pivotal times in American history. We are building up here for the midterms, for the upcoming presidential election, but we need your help. So if you can help us out by becoming a premium member today at breakingpoints.com, we're trying to change America for the better and the entire world.
So what are you waiting for, guys? Go to breakingpoints.com and sign up and help us build a new mainstream.